Carmen, and today we are going to talk about using stroke and coat on greenware at Cone 6. So in front of me here, I have a couple pieces that I've made utilizing a stroke and coat gradient, and then I carved through the stroke and coat. So I applied my stroke and coat to leather hard clay, blended it, and let that set up and carve through that. And that is how we create these awesome designs here. Stroke and coat is a wonderful product to use for this particular technique. Since we're over firing it, it does melt and kind of help blend these colors together a little bit, so you can be a little bit softer with how clean you're blending them together. You can also apply it to greenware, so it is ideal for this technique because it has that softness, it's got a glossy finish, and it works really well when you're applying it to greenware. So here I've got a couple pieces in front of me, and we're gonna just go through this technique from start to finish. So here I've got a leather hard mug that I've made. I've applied a wax resist to the handle as well as the bottom here because I don't want stroke and coats on the area. And if I didn't have the wax resist, then I would smudge and muddy my glaze on here. So the wax resist is really nice. It works really, really well for me, making sure I'm only applying stroke and coat to this area of my piece. Here we have our cutie pie coral as well as jaded. So these are going to be the colors that I'm using today for this technique. I love using cutie pie coral as well as cantaloupe as warmer colors for this technique because they don't orange peel as much as other warm colors with stroke and coat. So the reds and oranges can often cause a texture if they're applied really thick. But the cutie pie coral as well as the cantaloupe, which you can see here, they don't have any issues with the orange peel texture, which I really enjoy. Because for the most part, I end up using just like cooler, more neutral colors for this technique because of that. And here's some of my favorite stroke and coat colors that remain vibrant and opaque at Cone 6. Jaded, Teal Next Time, Blue Yonder, Dandelion, Sour Apple, Blue Isle, Bluegrass, Fruit of the Vine, Cutie Pie Coral, and Cantaloupe. This is just a small palette that I've selected for my own personal work, but there's lots of other stroke and coat colors that work well at stoneware temperatures, so be sure to check out Mako's website to see those Cone 6 results. So I really use a lot of glaze when I'm doing this because I want to have full coverage and I'm applying 2 coats here. So I basically just blend these 2 colors with a brush. I'll use a little bit of water to help make like a smoother blend with it, but for the most part it's just applying them with a brush here. So you really want to load up that fan brush and then apply it to 1/2. When I'm blending colors together, usually I'll apply, I won't divide it in half. I'll do probably like 2/3 for the first color, and then the second color I'll blend down to the halfway mark. And that's just to provide an area for the colors to blend together, and they have to be overlapping for them to blend. So the first color I'll apply to the bottom 2/3 of the piece, kind of like this here. You can see it's going on pretty thick. I like to apply my first coat thick because that helps with the blending. The clay is more saturated if we put this on thicker, so that keeps this glaze open a little bit longer, which makes it easier to blend the colors together. So I'll go ahead and apply my second color here on the top. And I like to get one clean pass before I start blending, because once I start blending it, my brush has the other color on it. and then I don't get that clean color at the top. So I'll do this first one, trying to get a nice clean color. And now that I have that applied, I'll kind of work my way down for the actual blending. So like I said earlier, the stroke and coats are pretty forgiving when it comes to blending. So you can have you don't want to have a hard line for the blend because that might showcase itself, but really you don't have to be super, super clean about your brush strokes here because the stroke and coat, since we're putting it on kind of thick, it kind of melts into itself a little bit. So it really does soften or provide a little bit of leeway for how clean you're blending it. So yeah, here is our first pass. You can see here that it's not totally perfect, but we don't have any hard lines. So really I'm just trying to eliminate hard lines, but if I have a little bit of streakiness, I can make sure that, or I can ensure that that will go away by the time I fire it to cone 6. So now we'll just let this dry. All right, so we're ready for coat 2 of our stroke and coat on our leather hard clay. This piece here, it's nice and dry to the touch. It's still a little bit moist because it does take a while for it to dry with that leather hard clay, but we're mostly dry. We don't have a lot of shiny spots, just where it's kind of thick. So we'll go ahead and apply our second coat. I'll start with the same order that I did last time, applying the jaded to the bottom 2/3 of our piece. Now that we're doing our second coat, it really stays open way longer than even the first coat. So this is definitely a technique that takes a little bit of patience with drying. It's really helpful. I work in rounds of 12. So by the time I get through the 12th piece, I can start over at the beginning. We want to make sure to build that material up on the surface. And so I've got my cutie pie coral on the top, and now I'm blending it down. And I kind of have a harsh line there, so I'm going to get a little bit more cutie pie coral on half of my brush to kind of try to pull that down a little bit further. I would suggest, if you're new to it, perhaps doing colors that when they blend together, they don't create brown. So this sample here is a really good one. Using a light and dark blue color works really, really well, because all you're gonna do is make another blue. Blending a pink with a green, that's kind of a risky business if you're kind of new to applying gradients, because you could easily make a really super muddy color. And then once we have our 2 coats applied here, this is nice and open, but I do want to clean up this wax resist here. So the bottom resisted really, really well, so I'm just gonna hit it with a sponge here. And I like to clean up my handle, usually with a brush, just because it's a little bit easier to get into these little pieces, or into this corner here. So I'll dip a little bit of water on my brush, dab the extra off, and then just kind of use that water to get this color to get off of the wax. So it's nice and easy, pretty minimal cleanup, but it's definitely important to do, because if you leave the color on the cup, then it's going to resist the glaze you put on it. So remember that anywhere that you do have stroke and coat, it's going to be shiny in the bisque kiln. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. You don't want to stack these at all. It is a glaze and it does mature at bisque. So just be mindful of that when you're loading it. And so here we have our 2 coats of stroke and coat applied to the cup, which is leather hard. So be patient with the drying time with these, since you're applying it to leather hard clay and stroke and coat is a very thick product. It will take a little bit longer to dry, but just be patient, let it dry in between each coat. And then once you have 2 coats applied and blended, then you can go ahead and start with your carving. So I like to just do sort of a general guideline before I actually start carving. So I will take a needle tool, or usually I use a pencil, and just kind of like make up the design I'm gonna put on there. So I've been really into mountain things, and I've been kind of trying to refine that design a little bit. So I'll start with the mountain outlines here. So we've got our general mountain outline, and then I like to leave like a little area for trees. And when I'm doing my trees, I'll do bigger lines for my closer trees, and then do smaller lines as we kind of move back. And so that's like a general guide for my carving that I have here. It's kind of messy, but it will do. Here I've got a wonderful diamond core carving tool that I like to utilize. This tip kind of helps create variation in your lines depending on the angle that you're putting it at, as well as how deep you carve. So this is kind of nice because it can create a lot of line variation due to the shape. And honestly, carving through stroke and coat into leather hard clay just feels so nice. It's like really just carving through butter, basically. The stroke and coat sort of resaturates the clay surface, so it's nice and soft, and the carving just goes really smoothly that way. And the cool thing about stroke and coat melting, these little lines that I made that I didn't carve over, it'll kind of disappear since the stroke and coat kind of fills that in, since it's melting so much, being fired to cone 6. All right, we've got our mountain outlines here, and then we can go ahead and add, I like to add a little bit of like shading and different variation with these. So I'll kind of come down from the peaks here. And then our little shading lines. My trees, I like to start with my background trees. My bigger tree, I like to use a little bit bigger of a tool for the foreground tree. So I have this like sim carving tool here. And this tip is just a little bit thicker than that one. So it just takes off a little bit more, which is helpful for just making the bigger trees and making them feel like they're closer. Okay, that's like a quick and dirty carving thing. And then when you're done carving, you have this wonderful design that's on the whole entire thing. So I've got my little moon and everything. So this is a fully carved mug with stroke and coat applied. This one's nice and dry, so this guy is ready to go in the bisque kiln. And once I fired it to bisque, that's when I'll glaze all of these other areas here. So I've actually got a sample here of a planter that I made So this here, it was fired to cone 04. And as you can see here, obviously these areas need glazed. And since I do have this texture here, I do have to still apply a resist. So since I'm dipping these pieces, I don't want to get the glaze in these areas. So I'll kind of just paint wax on these lines, kind of messy. And then the rest of the area that has the stroke coat, it will resist the glaze already. So I would just fill these pieces in with wax. I'll fill these pieces and the bottom, and then I'll dip the entire thing. And then that's when I do my cone 6 firing. I actually don't use a clear glaze, so I'll just use them as like liner glazes. I prefer to use the frosted glaze lines, so like Norris Blue, Frosted Lemon, Coral Sands. Sand and Sea is a really good one. My favorite to use, especially because right here I'm using Brown Bear, so it's like a dark brown stoneware clay body. I really love using Lavender Mist as well as Gray Opal. So these are like really subtly different, but the way that these kind of model on this clay body is just so gorgeous. So here you can see this one's like a little bit purplier, but not as purple as like you might expect Lavender Mist to be, and that's just because it's on this dark clay body and that's reacting. But these speckles that come through from it being on the clay body are just so pretty. So this is Lavender Mist here. This is the Gray Opal. I love Gray Opal on Brown Bear too. It's just like a lovely neutral that breaks over the brown, so they really, really complement each other really well. Here is a Norris Blue one. So you can see, of course, that nice modeling inside. And here you can see where it's not quite as thick, but you still get that beautiful blue. And actually I also have a Raspberry Mist one. So this is one I've been using, trying to integrate, because like I said earlier, I use a lot of cool colors due to just the stroke and coats the cooler colored stroke and coats perform better at cone 6 more consistently. So I get a lot of cool colors, so I have used the Raspberry Mist to try to add a little bit of warmth. And here it just really, really pops with that nice dark color below it. And then all of these pieces have an overglaze applied. So here I've applied a white gold luster as well as a gold luster, just like a regular bright gold luster that I'll use for these other ones. And that's a third firing, and that would be fired to cone 019. All right, so I think that is all that I have for you guys today. Just to recap, we are applying our stroke and coat to leather hard clay, 2 coats for a sgraffito technique. This piece will then be bisque fired, and then glaze is applied for our glaze firing after that, and then it's fired to cone 6. So that's how we get this lovely technique here, layering stroke and coats with sgraffito at cone 6. Thanks so much for your time today, and always remember, make it Mako.